In this episode of OG55, we are deep diving into the afterlife. What happens when you die? What happens when you leave Earth and you enter the spiritual realm? We're going to deep dive into it. We're gonna actually talk about Eben Alexander, Dr. Eben Alexander's experience. Break it down. Talk about it up next. I got the Italiano and Mr. Webba with me today. Here we go. Today, we're talking all about near-death experiences. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. We're going deep, 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 deep. George, if you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on Instagram under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you can find me right here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
Sticky, sticky, sticky. We got Mr. Webba in the house rocking the Mighty Ducks. The Mighty Ducks. Shout out to Mr. Seymour Duck as well.
Quack, quack. Absolutely.
Quack, quack, quackity quack. Mr. Webba, if you can let everybody home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Sure thing. Absolutely. First of all, OG, thank you for having me on for this show. This is probably like one of my favorite topics and also interests as well, right? I mean, we love Disney and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I love Disney, video games, anime, but also this topic here is one of my favorites also to talk about and to look into all that good stuff. But you can find me on Twitter, and Instagram more so, Mr. Webba, as you see down here at Websinger760.
Boom. There he is. Okay, so before we play the video, we're gonna do like we always do here on OG55. Like, yeah, we do with the Disney videos. We're gonna play the video, or we're gonna talk about it along the way, break it down. But before I do that, Ebba, I'll start with you.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand with near-death experiences? Like, do you believe this stuff, or is it a bunch of like hokey, like, yeah, right? Like, where do you stand with it? Do you believe it or nah?
Actually, so I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, I do. I do believe in a afterlife. I do. See, I'm not religious. I was never baptized, so I'm not part of any religion technically. But I do believe in a higher power or divine creator, so to speak. Something that exists outside of our universe, our reality, what have you. But I do believe in that, and this phenomenon, right? This near death experience phenomenon, I do believe it is real. And just because like you see a lot of people that question it, which I get, right? You should always be skeptical, ask questions, right?
Right.
But when you actually dive into it and hear the podcast, read the books, see the interviews, all stuff, like there's so many experiences that have similar themes or patterns to them, and some stuff that happens that just there's no way it is not real. You know what I mean?
Oh, I agree with you, and we'll get into the details, the meat and potatoes, a little bit as we go on. But I actually remember reading this one near-death experience where the person died and they left their body, like you always hear about, right? You leave your body. They were pain-free once they left their body. They were operating on this person's body, the doctors, the surgeons, whatever, right? The person, though, their actual consciousness was outside their body and exploring the hospital, basically. So they were exploring the hospital, and when the person came back to life and reunited with the body, he was able to tell the nursing staff what pieces of paper said 2 and 3 floors above where they were operating on him.
Yes.
Now, keep in mind, this person was asleep, like anesthesia,
Yeah.
and technically died. There should be no experience at all where he would know details of what was in a room that was not even on it. Not only was it not in his room, it was not even on his floor on the hospital, and he could tell you what a piece of paper said on a desk 3 floors up. Absolutely crazy. How do you prove that? A lot of doctors will tell you, oh, it's just the drugs or the dopamine draining, and it's like, okay, that's fine, you know what I'm saying, I get it, but that doesn't explain that. You know what I'm saying? To be able to know what was in another room when you're technically dead or unconscious doesn't make any sense, regardless of what your brain chemicals are doing.
Well,
You know,
on top of being dead, you're also under or either dead or like basically almost dead. You're also under anesthesia.
right?
That's doubly impossible.
That's what I'm saying. It's
So-
that's essentially a medically anesthesia. They say that they put you to sleep, but really what it is they put you under a medically induced coma. Is essentially what it is. There's varying degrees of that, but that's essentially what it is. But George, what do you think about this? Near-death experiences, afterlife. Before we dive into the video, do you believe in this stuff?
I do, absolutely, and I don't really consider myself like a religious person in the sense, but I have a very strong faith in my beliefs. I believe in God. I was raised Catholic. You know, I still follow somewhat of the Catholic faith, but I am Christian. You know, so I do believe in heaven. I also believe in hell. I don't want to go to hell, but I believe that there is an existence to hell because I believe in heaven. That's just my own personal belief. And so I feel that I can't foresee like what heaven is until I actually approach it, but I can have an idea of what I perceive heaven as. And there's also and I'm not doing this to get preachy, but I'm just saying, just because of the subject matter of what we're talking about, for anyone who hasn't seen the movie Heaven is for Real, there's also a book about it. This is actually based off of a true story. I believe the young boy was named Colton, and he came down with a very bad I don't know if it was an intestinal infection or appendix or what have you, and I believe he went into like a septic shock, and he still had a pulse. He was still under, but he was able to go to heaven, and he was able to actually meet his grandfather, who he had never met. It was either his grandfather or his great grandfather. I can't remember. And when he came back and he was all better and everything, he was talking to his dad, and he said, "I saw Grandpa." And the dad showed him a picture of his grandfather in his older age. And he said, "Is this the man you saw?" He said, "No, that's not the man I saw." And the dad just kind of sat back and didn't really know what to think of it. Then he went into the photo album, or a box with old photos, and he showed him his grandfather, but in his younger age. And he said, "Is this the man you saw?" And he said, "Yes, that's the man that I met."
And that's interesting that you mentioned that, George, because that's what that's what I've heard a lot with these near-death experiences, is that when you die and you cross over, if you're an old lady or an old man, when you go into that realm, you are the idealistic version of yourself. So you're that young, fitting guy that you were when you were 25.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then heaven isn't ready for this.
They're not ready. They are not ready. But yeah, I actually, for me personally, I do believe in an afterlife. I'm a very spiritual person, you know, but I don't necessarily believe in like an organized religion. And the reason why, and I don't want to, I mean, I hope I don't offend anybody. It's just my personal belief. But the reason why I don't believe in an organized religion is because I think that man has had too many hands have been in that cookie jar, in my opinion. And there's been a lot of misinterpretations and things like that. Now, I absolutely believe in God. I absolutely believe in a higher entity. I absolutely believe that when you die, you go somewhere else. I mean, we have physical, we're going to go over it today. We have literally, there's people who have done this and come back with proof. Now, a lot of people poo-poo these people and go, "Oh, you're nuts." But I don't. These are credible stories, credible people. So there is something after when we die. I just don't necessarily buy into the notion of the organized religion, because I do think there's a lot of corruption with.
I agree with you on that, and actually, I think you stepped away when I was saying it. I was born and raised Catholic. I still follow, you know, somewhat of the Catholic traditions and what have you. I am Christian and what have you. But when someone asks me, "Are you religious?" No, because I don't necessarily go word for word verbatim of like what an individual organized religion states, and they tell me what I need to believe. I'm a heavy believer on my own personal faith and my own relationship with God, and that's how I'm spiritual in that.
Yeah, and that's how it should be. I think it should be a one-on-one relationship with God. You know,
Right.
it should be one-on-one like that. You have a connection with God. He, you know, and yeah, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. This is Dr. Eben Alexander. He was a neurosurgeon, I believe, or, you know, so he's a
Yeah.
neurosurgeon. Go ahead, Ebba. Sorry.
Oh no, no, good. And I was just saying, yeah, he was a neurosurgeon, and I want to make a point here. A lot of people are going to say, "Oh, but he's not a neuroscientist." Whoa, 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 whoa! A neurosurgeon is as much as a scientist as a neuroscientist is, right? Just because he's not in the laboratory doing neuroscience stuff in like a controlled environment laboratory, doesn't mean he doesn't know any less about the brain. He has to know about the brain because he has to know how to save these people with brain issues in the hospital, right? Like he's a neurosurgeon. Like he has to know what the issues is, how to fix it, how the brain works and how it's supposed to work and how we think it should work, right? and
Exactly.
and how it relates to consciousness and all that stuff. So don't poo-poo him just because he's not a neuroscientist. No, he is much as a scientist as any other PhD or MD, you know, in this field.
Exactly. No, 100%. And he was a very much by the book kind of guy, and he'll get into it. But he
Yeah.
was very much a by the book kind of guy with just, you know, what we know, the textbook knowledge. And once he goes on this odyssey, it changes his whole belief system. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing the video. It's about 16 minutes. It's not too long, but like we do, guys, hey, we're here on the channel, whether it's a fresh baked video, whether it's a Hey Bricky video, whether it's a DSNY video, you know, we play it and we pause it. We talk about it along the way. Same applies here. So let's get the party started. Here we go. This is one of my favorite topics, by the way. This topic today actually is courtesy of Michael Webba, which when you texted me this, I'm like, dude, I am so on board with it. I love this shit, bro. I
Me too.
love it.
Me too.
Fantastic.
Dr. Eben Alexander, thanks for joining me. I heard you had a near-death experience. You mind sharing with us, please?
I would love to share my experience. It's something that happened to me back in November 2008, and I've spent the last 15 plus years trying to make sense of it and coming to a deeper understanding as a scientist. This kind of meningitis is such a perfect model for human death because it deletes the human part of our brain. In fact, there's a medical case report on my medical records that came out September 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, which goes a long way to help strengthen my story. It was written by 3 doctors who were not involved in my care, but were absolutely fascinated by my recovery. And they make 2 major points in that paper. One is that it was a complete global infection of my brain, that there were no parts of the neocortex left unscathed. Basically, it says my brain could not have had a dream or hallucination. And yet what I did go through was the most profound, detailed, memorable, life-changing, and transformative set of events that I could possibly imagine. And they all happened while my brain was demonstrably offline. The other key lesson of that.
Go ahead, Ebba.
So first, I just want to say, yes, as a scientist, like I said, he's very much a scientist as what you would think, right? On top of that, I love this is a great video you pulled up, OG. By the way, I haven't seen this one, but I love that he mentioned, and I know he's mentioned it plenty of times, but for the audience, you know, that E. coli bacterial meningitis. Like he was saying, there's no way with that infection he could have any type of conscious experience, right? But yet he had one that was an amazing journey, odyssey, like you said, and that is medically like impossible. So anyway,
yeah, as far as we know medically, right?
Yeah.
When the brain goes, you go. That's what we know. Like the physical, the brain is the center of the consciousness. So if your brain goes, if your brain dead, you're dead. You know what I'm saying? Basically, essentially. So this story flies in the face of that common knowledge. You know, his brain was technically gone.
Yeah.
So why was he not only was he conscious, but he was having a more real than real experience, more memorable, this crazy visuals, all while his brain was sitting in a puddle of pus and not even there was no activity. It's fascinating to me. It's absolutely fascinating to me. It really does make you question, okay, so where does our consciousness come from? Because it's clearly not from the brain.
Well, and it's even to the fact of like when someone is under the table that had kind of like a near-death experience where they still have a pulse, you know, they still have a heartbeat. It's showing on the machines that they're alive. They're not conscious, but they're alive, but yet they're having an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
So technically it's like they're dead, but they're not. They're out of their body, but their body is still alive, showing that there is a heartbeat.
Yeah, and George, to go further into that, OG, after we do this, I'm not how long our reaction will take on this video, but I do want to dive further into the points George made about other cases like that of what can cause a near-death experience, and how that can happen with people, because there's so many stories of these experiences where people, yeah, they're probably not bodily dead, but they're still having an out-of-body experience that is objectively real, right? So, so I do want to get into that later, if we can, after we finish
Yeah.
this video
Oh,
here.
absolutely. I would love to. I would love to.
That case report is that you have to also explain my recovery. When the peer review editors read the case report, they said this is absurd. You don't have people this sick from bacterial meningitis who then end up making a full recovery. How do you explain it? And the three doctors who wrote the case report said it's because he had a near-death experience. So with that kind of backdrop, I'd like to now share what that experience was all about, why the neuroscientific community pays so much attention to my story. An important feature of my journey was my amnesia, that I went into this NDE without any memory of Earth, humanity, Eben Alexander's life events. It was an empty slate. Now, it all started with what I call an earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm, feeling roots or blood vessels all around me. It's like being in dirty jello. It seemed to go for ages, that initial phase.
So,
The good
OG,
news
sorry, real
is it
quick.
didn't last
Oh,
forever.
yeah.
There came a slow
Sorry, I just want to just real quick point out to the audience. So, if the audience here, if you guys have never heard of this before or never looked into this, when he's talking about his experience, keep in mind when these people have these experiences, they have to use earthly words that still don't even come close to what they're trying to explain of what they experienced.
I'm glad you brought that up, Webba, because he mentions this too. I don't know if he mentions it in this video, but when he meets God, he said the word God feels so tiny
Yes.
compared to what he actually witnessed. You know what I'm saying? And there's no words for it. And so it's incredible.
that initial phase. The good news is it didn't last forever. There came a slowly spinning white light that came packaged with a perfect musical melody. It had fine silvery and golden tendrils going off into the edges. And as it was slowly spinning and came towards me, it opened up like a rip and led up into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley. This is where I would stress for people that might think that a near-death experience would be kind of vague
Really
and
quick,
dreamy
sorry.
and murky.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
This was
It almost likes to me like when he makes this description, it's almost like where he said kind of like this dirty jello kind of moment. This is almost like the barrier between reality and the afterlife.
Yes.
So it's almost like that's his transition, and then by approaching the white light, and it's like a ripple effect, and then boom, then he's shown what's beyond the light, as whether he calls it heaven or whether he calls it afterlife or what have you. I felt like this point of moment is like him transitioning from one realm to the next.
Right. Yeah, I would, in my opinion, I would say that this was like his version of like the classic tunnel you hear about.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
No, 100%. That's 100% what it was.
the edges. And as it was slowly spinning and came towards me, it opened up like a rip and led up into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley. This is where I would stress for people that might think that a near-death experience would be kind of vague and dreamy and murky. This world, this material world, is vague and dreamy and murky compared to that reality. It was sharp.
That's bizarre to me.
Wow.
So what he said, what Dr. Eben Alexander is saying here, guys, is that this afterlife experience was more real and more crisp than the reality we're experiencing right now on Earth. Your life on Earth is more dreamlike and vague than what he experienced in his afterlife.
And
how crazy is that?
And I've known several people that had mentioned they had near-death experiences where they had seen the afterlife of what was beyond, and they came back, and they said nothing against our loved ones, but in comparison to living here or being there, they would prefer to be there. So after that point, anytime there was a death in their family and they were still alive, they would not mourn the person they would miss them, but they would not mourn. And people were asking, why aren't you crying? Why aren't you sad? And they said, because I got to experience where they are at now. And trust me, I'm not mourning for that, because if you were to see what I got to see where they're at now, it's nothing in comparison.
Yeah, and
Wow.
here's the thing too. It's not like here's the thing, because when you like look into other experiences, it's not only the sight, guys. For the audience, it's not only the sight that they're seeing this Chris is more real than real. It's all the sensations, the like hearing, the
Oh, big
feel.
deal. They could have that with One Night with Me.
George rocking that world, man. But yeah, it's just insane to me, because um there's another story later I want to bring up from that Dr. Jeffrey Long OG I told you about. He brings up the girl named Vicky, but I'll get to that later. But it's very interesting to hear when these people explain that our world right now is more dreamlike and like mucky and stuff compared to this other reality. And I assume probably it's because your consciousness is now detached from the physical parts of your brain, which actually kind of constrains
Yes.
your senses for everything.
It's your brain is more of a filtration device
Yeah.
than it is of something that's producing consciousness. You're right, Ebba. That's a great way of putting it. It restricts it. It limits your consciousness, and when you don't have that brain anymore, that filter, it just unleashes, and you have this.
Oh man,
crystal clear and just really beautiful beyond description. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. And we were above this incredibly verdant, fertile meadow, surrounded by this lush forest. And the forest and meadows had these waterfalls and the crystal blue pools. There were thousands of beings dancing in this meadow, incredible joy and festivity. And I remember very vividly dogs jumping, children playing, and all this festivity
hold
was
on.
being fueled.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Dogs.
Yes.
Dogs. And this is another thing I really want to discuss, because I am a dog owner. I have two amazing dogs named Mickey and Little Guy. I love these guys. They're amazing. I did have a dog. Her name was Mitzi. She was a little Shih Tzu. She unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but she lived a really long life. 20 plus years. She lived a very long life. But these animals, like when you have a pet, whether Ebba, I know you have cats, right? George, you have a dog named Mickey as well. They are, and maybe non-pet owners might not really understand it, but if you're a pet owner, these little animals are family. They are very much family, and you have a very much a connection with these animals. And I'm one of those people that believe that we vastly underestimate animals. I think they are so much smarter and so much more spiritual than we lead on to believe. And so we do have connections to these animals. So it makes sense that we would see them in the afterlife, and they have souls. These little beings have souls, so why wouldn't they be there up there with us? It just makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, those crazy OGs like that. I've even read stories where people actually saw their horses.
Wow.
Well,
man.
I've heard a lot of people have seen anything from horses, chickens, cats, dogs. I just hope heaven has boots.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do believe that too. Because I think you're right, OG. I feel like that animals have a much spiritual connection than what a lot of humans give them credit for. Because it's almost like when you look at them in their eyes and they look back at you, it's almost like they can read into your soul. And it's like they see and know something that we can't even comprehend. So to have that kind of connection with your animal, because you treat them like family, because they are family, so it's like, so if your loved ones are in the great beyond and in the afterlife or heaven or whatever you tend to call it, why wouldn't your pets and animal friends be there as well? And honestly, for anyone who there's like a poem out there, I believe it's called it's Over the Rainbow Bridge. And I tell you what, you read that poem like about your loved one, like that your pet is waiting for you on the other side of the rainbow bridge, it would bring any grown man to tears, honestly.
Oh, I'm telling you, when Mitzi passed away in 2017, we were all a mess for a long time. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it really is, you're losing a family member. You know, it's hard. It really is hard. And these animals, like dogs, there's so much unconditional love. No matter what they're going through, they're so excited to see you.
Yeah.
It's just like this unconditional love that they have. They're just, I say it so many times on like Twitter and stuff, but it's kind of true. Like human beings don't deserve dogs. Dogs are too good for us. I really do believe that in so many ways. But
Well, I'll ask you: do human beings deserve anything?
I know, right? I know. It's crazy.
Cool above, because these swooping orbs of pure kind of oval spiritual beings that when I came back to this world, I called them angelic choirs. And these swooping angelic choirs were emanating chants, anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness. It was a spiritual home that was very welcoming. Now, another thing about that Gateway Valley, I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful young woman. Doesn't get better than that. She had these sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, high forehead, broad smile. She never said a word to me. She never had to. Her emotional truth were directly linked to my mind.
And I've heard that before. Eben isn't the first person who has said that, where there's no talking.
Yeah.
Everything is done through, like, I guess you would call it like telepathy.
Yeah.
Where you think it and the other person knows what you're thinking. And it's like this exchange of like just like thoughts.
Does James Cameron know something that we don't know? Because it seems like a lot of that like falls into his films, like just like that generalized connection, like even like with Avatar, like where the Na'vi are connected to the land and they're connected to the animals and they're connected to each other, where you don't necessarily have to talk, but it's just the emotion of visuals.
Well,
like,
that's George. Well, I think that there portrays, and there's other movies that do this too. Like, for example, Brother Bear. You know, like that movie hits me every time that at the end of that movie because of that spiritual essence with like with the bear and the brother, right? It's like, oh man, dude. But it's like it's that connection to nature, and what a lot of these stories talk about is that they realize that everybody is connected in some way, right? Like think of you being like a snowflake, a unique snowflake, and you drop into water, right? And you kind of become one with that, but you're still your own identity, pretty much.
Right. Well said, Eva. Well said.
This kind of mind meld is her message to me, which I think was the core message I was to bring back to this world. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for, and you can do no wrong. I wish I had explained that last part, you can do no wrong, much better in the book. I was in a realm of such pure love. The most optimal way forward was a way of loving kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness. And that's what I meant by you can do no wrong, because that's what transformed so many near-death experiencers to come back to this world far more loving. They come back more spiritual and yet often less religious. Because sometimes, unfortunately, religions tend to pit us against each other and pretend that we're.
That's exactly what we're talking about here. There's a difference between being spiritual and being religious, where the religion, I feel, is kind of like a lot of it is a man-made construct. Spirituality is a much more organic, I feel, a much more organic relationship with your soul and God and what have you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. He made that connection.
Well, also too, real quick, I also want to point out is that when you listen to people who've had near-death experiences, this is an example right here in this video audience. I've watched him since he's had this. Okay, so for years, he has always said the same thing time after time after time. His story has never changed. Even the way he describes things never changes. And after over a decade, you know that person's telling the truth when it's so ingrained into their memory that they can give those details still over a decade plus later, and the story never changes.
No, and I've heard him say, and I've heard other people say as well, these near-death experiences, that they stay crisp in your memory forever. Like it's weird because like if I were to try to think back to like high school, right, my days in high school, I can still remember things, you know, but it's foggy as time goes on. It gets foggier as time goes. You do forget things. But from what I'm hearing from these near-death experiencers, where it's like they don't forget anything. It's like this memory that is like more crisp and more clear than any other memory they have. It's wild.
Yeah, it's Unbelievable.
We're not all truly in this together and truly bound together through these forces of love. It turns out that this Gateway Valley was not a final endpoint. It was a stepping stone to something even grander. What happened for me next was those angelic choirs provided yet another portal. And all of that collapsing down to this complex oversphere. At that point, I was in what's called the core. And the core is where all dualities, paradoxes are completely resolved. It's where I came to recognize that my very conscious awareness was sourced in that infinitely loving God force, that we're never separate from that. When I entered that core realm, I was told, you are not here to stay. You'll be going back, but we'll teach you many things. And there were many lessons. And that, of course, is what I've been unraveling and talking about for the 15 years since my coma. But the interesting point for discussion right now is that I would spontaneously tumble back down and fall back to that earthworm eye view. And it was by remembering the musical notes, the melody, by going through that.
So when he would spontaneously, he kept getting sucked out of this afterlife experience. So I think, this is just my speculation, but what I think was happening here is why he kept getting sucked back down. When they were operating on him or whatever they were doing to sort of try to bring him back, they were sort of successful in doing so to get him back up and running again to some degree. So he would get yanked out of that spiritual realm. He'd be back kind of technically in his body again, but then he would die. You know what I'm saying? So I think it was like that push and pull of like, they're working on him on Earth. Sometimes they'd be able to pull him back in and start to save him. Sometimes they'd lose him. And that's why he's constantly getting that push and pull. What say you, Ebba? You think that's kind of what's happening here?
I think that's what's happening to extent, but also I think what's happening too is that a lot of these stories. So kind of like what George brought up earlier, about when when family members, they pretty much they didn't want to leave that place to come back, right? Yes, they have their friends, their family, their loved ones, right? But in this new place, it was so much grander and greater that a lot of times they don't want to leave. They're like, no, I want to stay. This is fucking fantastic. I feel perfect. I feel great, right? And with this, it's like a lot of times people are forced back. And I think what was happening was a combination of probably him being worked on, but also the combination of, him kind of being forcefully kind of returned, but then he's wanting to go back again. You know what I mean? Because of the way his coma was, it's not like because he was still like kind of pretty much brain dead almost, right? I mean,
right.
It's like that, his brain was like functioning for the most part, and then he would come back and just wake up, right? Like he had more of like, go down, go back up again, go down, go back up again. So it's like he was fighting to keep himself in that space. Whereas a lot of the times with the other experiences, they either choose to go back or they're forced back down by like whatever invisible force there is, and they feel themselves going back down at an incredible speed and back into their body again. So I think with this, he was able to kind of hold on to that and then go back as he could, as many times as he could.
Yeah, interesting.
Melody in my mind that I could conjure up that light portal. To me, that was a beautiful lesson. And people often ask, what about that music? Do you remember it now? Could you hum it for us? Remember that in that realm, you're not hearing with the ears, and it's gone far beyond just being vibrations of air molecules hitting the eardrum. Likewise, we can see far more than you can see with the eyes. You have knowledge through direct identification. You become huge swathes of the scene. But anyway, I would tumble back down into the earth for my view.
That's fascinating. So what he says here, give me 1 second.
Oh, it was a little bit after.
He says that you become the scene. That's fascinating.
Yes. So a lot of times when you read the stuff, it's not only that you're like how we're here, right, experiencing this, but the connection is so great that you also can experience what the environment is, right? Like you can like feel, okay, like for example, like the common white light, right? It's not just a bright white light that they say, which sounds magnificent because they say it's like brighter than 1,000 suns, but you feel the love, the comfort, right? You can feel other energies in that realm. So it's not just experience, oh, I'm here, la 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 la. It's like you're feeling the emotions of the positivity that realm has to offer, and you can experience different vantage points of that realm.
So you don't, like, if I'm looking at a giant tree in this realm, I can almost like become the tree, feel what the tree is feeling, and sort
Yeah.
of like you kind of tap into the energy of all this stuff, which I think that's fascinating.
And that's what I was kind of going back to saying, like with Avatar. It's
Mhm.
like you become one with nature, you become one with the land, you become one with the animals, and
Yes.
it's almost like, and that's why I find the Native American culture very fascinating, of how they kind of tap into um, being one with the land. And it's
Yes.
honestly, if you really like sit down with someone who studies that culture and was brought up with that culture, it's very fascinating that I can kind of see those implementations here on Earth. That's basically what all this is in the beyond.
Yeah, well, another fascinating thing too, and again, there's so much I want to talk about. Oh man,
Yeah.
is that I don't remember if it happened with him. I don't think so, but a common experience, George, and for the audience out there, is people when they have vision, right? It's not just vision and like you see like a pie, like a pie shaped vision, right? You know, a lot of times their vision is, yeah, it's greater. It's greater than 2020, right? And you can see greater and more crisp. But here's the other thing: you experience spherical vision. Okay, not just 360. You experience spherical vision. It means that you can see up, down, left to right, and diagonally all at the same time. Tell me, how
Uh,
the fuck does that work, dude? That is
I,
insane.
I can't even imagine that. That's crazy. That is crazy. I've heard that too, Eva, though.
I'm
That's wild.
getting vertigo just thinking about it.
Going through that melody in my mind, that I could conjure up that light portal. To me, that was a beautiful lesson. And people often ask, what about that music? Do you remember it now? Could you hum it for us? Remember that in that realm, you're not hearing with the ears, and it's gone far beyond just being vibrations of air molecules hitting the eardrums. Likewise, we can see far more than you can see with the eyes. You have knowledge through direct identification. You become huge swathes of the scene. But anyway, I would tumble back down to the earth where my view. By remembering the musical notes, I could conjure up the melody again. And I made that journey several times and had multiple lessons in the passage. And in many ways, the medium was the message. The very fact I could have these kind of transitions in level of consciousness was teaching me a tremendous amount about the spiritual realm and consciousness in general, and about the aspects of it that are far above and beyond anything having to do with the filtering effects of the brain. I learned as a neuroscientist, the brain does not create consciousness at all. It's a transceiver or a filter.
Right.
And this is
Right, say,
why
OG.
when the brain and body die,
Yeah.
it's not the end of
Yeah, it's a filter. Once you lose the filter, it's like off to the races, which is
Mhm.
fascinating because we've learned our whole lives that the brain is the entire machine. It's not.
Yes.
It's
No.
restricting it, So,
Exactly.
conscious awareness. It's actually an
Really quick, I just
expansion
wanted to
and
add to that.
growth of your.
yeah, absolutely.
Because if you actually think, us as humans, we only use a very small percentage of our brain. So that percentage that we use, or I'm sorry, the bigger percentage that we don't use is probably what we would be experiencing with this, that would allow us to be able to experience this. But with the small, I think it's only like what
10%.
10% of our brain that we use. It just goes to show, how much that is not unlocked
Well, I
until
think
we actually hit into the afterlife.
Well, I think another issue too, and this is more, and I'm gonna call it out like it is, the fucking Western world culture. We're not tapped into this like you have with your Eastern mysticism cultures, like the Tibets, right? Who practice meditation and dream yoga and lucid dreaming and stuff like that, which I do want to get into later. But here in the Western world, we're so more like focused on what's the objective reality. That's all we care about.
Physical, and that's it.
Exactly, right? If it's not physical here, you know, this, right, it doesn't pertain, it doesn't matter, right? So I think that's a very skewed viewpoint to have. But yeah, and that's why I love this topic. It's becoming more of a it's becoming more mainstream now, right? Which is great because it's going more into the awareness of the Western world.
Yeah, no, well said.
And this is why when the brain and body die, it's not the end of conscious awareness. It's actually an expansion and growth of your conscious awareness as you're liberated from the shackles of the brain and body. This is why it is such an adventure and nothing to be feared. For people who think, well, I don't like this life, I don't like this material world, why can't I just be up there forever in that heavenly realm? The reason is because we have work to do as souls in this realm. The goal is not to end up spending forever in that heavenly realm. I mean, that eternal perfection doesn't contribute to the growth of the one mind. Now, there did come a time.
That's true. Like when you have perfection, there's no growth. So you kind of come down to earth, kind of like soul school almost, right? It's a soul school. You come down here and that plays into the filtration device called the brain. Because if you come down to earth knowing everything you know up there, well, then you're not learning anything because you're all knowing, all like there's no lesson then. There's no hardship because you're too tapped in. The brain has to filter it out, has to restrict it when you come down here, because that way there are some challenges, and that way it gives you room to grow, and you fall down, you get up, and that whole thing. You know what I'm saying? So it plays into a whole thing as the brain being a filter.
Yeah, and I think that's what's hard, right? Is you look at our entire Earth, right? There's so many different cultures and the way like different upbringings of people, right? And then you have issues with like people sometimes have, mental illnesses, right? Like, bipolar, PTSD, anxiety, right? Or whatever, OG, right? You have stuff that makes it harder to live with, right? And or you have like you're schizophrenic, whatever. But that can be hard because that the brain does play a part in how you do behave in the physical manner, right? Because it's still
Right.
kind of connected right there. And with my point is that I think that the ultimate lesson, from what I hear again and again and again, it's about having the love, spreading the love, right? To pretty much whoever, right? That you can, right? Because in that realm, love is the purest emotional form state of being. That is the most important thing to have. So, and of course, you want to try to be the best to be a good person, right? But no one's ever perfect, right? And like you said, if you come down here all perfect and I'm all good, right? You wouldn't learn the lessons of what it's like to not be a perfect being.
Yeah, you need the imperfection to learn and to grow. If you don't have that imperfection, then you don't grow. And like Eben Alexander is saying, this is like you're trying to, your soul, your spirit is trying to have growth. And if you're perfect, how are you going to grow? So it makes all the sense in the world. The more you kind of put these pieces together, why the brain filters, why are you down here? Oh, it's soul school. Okay, it all kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Of course, where the melody didn't work. It no longer conjured up that beautiful light portal. To say I was sad at that time would be a bit of an understatement, but I also knew I could trust that I would be taken care of. I had gotten that assurance every time I passed through the core, through my guardian angel, that I was deeply loved and cherished. Every bit of that was now part of my understanding. And this is where I then witnessed thousands of beings going off around me into the distance, heads bowed, this murmuring energy coming up to me. But I was now down in that kind of early, more foreboding phase, the earthworm eye view, and yet I felt this beautiful, loving, peaceful energy of being in a spiritual home coming from these beings around me. And what I called all that when I came back to this world weeks later was the power of prayer. All these people with heads bowed, some holding candles, arms up in front of them, and that murmuring energy, even though I couldn't understand any of the words because of my amnesia, I could certainly appreciate this beautiful feeling of love and connection that was coming from that process. At that point that I then saw 6 faces that would bubble up out of the muck. I can remember them right now in my mind as vividly as if that had all happened this morning.
Yeah.
And yet when I first saw them.
Now, I'm just only speaking upon what my understanding was because of my own belief. When he had mentioned that the heads were bowing down and they were, saying a prayer or what have you, he couldn't understand the wording or what have you. From my understanding, and this is just my own personal belief, I believe that they were speaking in tongue.
Probably,
which is basically, it's a very strong, powerful messaging that's only for what I believe the communication between one and God. So being that he wasn't there fully 100% as being basically part of them fully, he would not understand the message and the language until you're actually there, and to you that's just like speaking English, but to someone on the outside looking in, it sounds like gibberish.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah,
That makes
absolutely.
sense.
In the NDE, I did not recognize them. I had no idea who these beings were. But they were important because in the hours later, as I was waking up and things were coming back to me, they turned out to be people. 5 of the 6 were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours I was in coma.
Wow.
Oh, whoa.
And there were many family and friends who had been there earlier in the week who did not show up in those memories. And so to me, what that helped to do was prove that the vast majority of the spiritual journey, which seemed to go on for months or years, had to happen between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of a 7-day coma. And I explained the timing of that a bit in Proof of Heaven, and especially in the second book, Living in a Mindful Universe. But the reality is that timing was very important for understanding. So it showed me this all didn't just happen when I was coming out of coma or somehow get put in there going deep into coma, but that these memories had to happen during that phase when in fact the case report shows my Glasgow coma scale and neurologic exams would have prevented any possibility of a big dream or hallucination happening. I will also explain though that one of those faces that I saw was not physically present. I said 5 of 6 were physically there. And the one who wasn't physically there was an old friend of mine from college, actually. We'd met in 1972 in freshman English at UNC Chapel Hill. And then we lost track of each other. But my family knew that she had helped people who were in coma and other illnesses through channeling. She wrote a book called Third Eye Open. Her name is Susan Rinches.
Wow.
And I remember she was as present to me as anyone else who appeared as those final 6 faces. And when I woke up and in the first hours and day or so, as my memories of who these people were was coming back to me, and I could finally identify my family members, I said, well, what about, and Susan, she was here. And they said, no, well, she was never physically there, that she channeled to me nights 4 and 5 of coma due to their request that she help me come back from this coma. And I remembered her as if she had been there physically. She, to me, was, just like everybody else. And of course, I knew by that point that in the spiritual realm of space and time are no longer impediments to communication between souls and spirits. And now it was the 6th face, though, that drove me back to this world. A 10-year-old boy. It was my son Bond, and I didn't recognize him when I saw him. The doctors had held a family conference where they said I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to a 2% chance, but with no chance of recovery. That's why they were recommending stopping the antibiotics, letting nature take its course, letting me go. And of course, they protected Bond from the worst news during that week. And when he overheard this, he knew things were much worse than he'd been told. He came running down the hallway, pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking over there, one over there, either pupil working. Anybody in medicine knows that's a horrible picture. And I'm certain I didn't see him with my eyes or hear him with my ears because my brain and sensory systems and all that were far too damaged by the meningitis. But somehow his pleading with me got through to me. Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. As if somehow that would make it so. And I didn't understand the words, didn't recognize him. But oh my gosh, now everything mattered. I'd spent this whole journey with the amnesia kind of giving me this little blanket of comfort that it could all continue or cease, did not matter. Now I realized everything mattered. It was the toughest thing I've ever had to do in my life, was clawing my way back to this world. It's like crawling out of this gravel pit where every reach up brings in all this tons of gravel and you can't get out. And yet somehow it happened. When I did start waking up in that ICU bed, struggling against the ventilator, and finally they pulled the tube out, I went, thank you. So I don't remember a lot of what happened in the next day and a half, but my sister Phyllis reminded me that I was sitting on the bed there, and she said it was the most amazing thing because they thought I was going to die and never come back. Then they saw me coming back, wondering what's this going to look like, and said that literally within minutes, I was just sitting there on the bed, and I would look at each and every person surrounding me, and I'd say, don't worry, all is well. And then I'd move on to the next person. Don't worry, all is well. And she said it was the most amusing thing, I think, because they were so worried about me. And there I was trying to tell them there's nothing to worry about. But interestingly enough, in the next 36 hours after waking up, I was in and out of a paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare, an ICU psychosis. It was very directly linked to that crazy meningitis. It was still badly affecting my brain. It was extraordinary, but then I entered that phase of healing. And it took about 2 months for all of my memories to come back. But interestingly enough, based on conversations with close family and friends, I realized the memories post-coma were more complete than the memories had been pre-coma.
Wow.
That's kind of astonishing, but it brings up the point that we elaborate on in that book, Living in a Mindful Universe, that neurosurgeons are beginning to accept that long-term memories are not stored in the brain at all. It's one of the final nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience. You can damage conversion of short-term to long-term memories by damaging the medial temporal lobes, the hippocampus, and those structures. We learned that in the early 1950s. But that doesn't have anything to do with long-term memory storage. They don't seem to be stored in the brain at all. I've spent the 15 years since my coma working with scientists around the world, coming to a deeper understanding of this. And what I can tell you now, there's a tremendous revolution going on in the scientific community, acknowledging the reality not only of near-death experiences, but a tremendous body of evidence supporting shared death experiences, telepathy, remote viewing. All of these things figure into a much bigger model of consciousness. Well, anybody wants to get to know this revolution, read Living in a Mindful Universe, and you will certainly get an idea where this is all headed. Really is a very exciting time. Personal journeyers now can take this lead from the scientific world and start doing their own work of exploring consciousness and start coming into the same healing and wholeness that so many other people are doing through these modalities. One of the greatest gifts is realizing the power we have to bring wholeness and healing into our own lives.
You say in your book that you weren't, or you were having a hard time believing in a loving God. Would you consider yourself an atheist at the time?
I would say I was more of an agnostic. I went through a dark night of the soul before my coma, very important. And I talk about that in Proof of Heaven. I quit saying prayers with my sons. I quit taking them to church. And really, that dark night of the soul came to an end 8 years later with my near-death experience.
Where can people find more about you and your work and your books?
Well, go to Eben, EBEN Alexander.com.
So yeah, I think it's good we stop here. And then we
Yeah, I agree.
So I want to go back to his point. Now we can get to the juicy stuff.
Yeah,
yes. So I'm gonna go back to his point about when he was talking about time and space, right? Because in a lot of these experiences, dude, when they have this experience, yes, like sometimes they'll float above their body, like on the operating table, and see like what's happening, right? But when they go on this journey to like the other realm, it could be like they're there for years when it's only been like a few hours probably here. Time and space there does not matter at all. Or they can be somewhere miles and miles away in an instant, just like that.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that the time is different, and it makes sense, right? Because like they say with when you die, it's for eternity, right? Mm-hmm. So you would think that because if you, for example, if you were to spend eternity somewhere, anywhere, based on Earth time,
right,
that's gonna feel different than if you stretch it out in that spiritual realm. With the time and space that they use up there, you know what I'm saying? Yep. So it makes sense. I always wonder that too, like how, like my grandmother passed away in 2003, right? I always wonder, like if she were to come back, I'd always want to ask her, like, how long did it feel for you? You know, like for me, it's been 20 years, right? But how long did it feel for her? Was it just a snap of the fingers for her, or was it like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I want to know that, like, what that felt for her, like the time difference, you know?
Right. Well, you know what's funny about that is I've always wondered, like, when people die, right? You know, like my uncle, he died like when I was like in middle school. But I've always wondered, like, right now, what are they doing? You know, like is there jobs over there? Like, you know, is there like afterlife theme parks or something? Like what's going on over there? You know what I mean?
You know,
but
Soak City.
The OG 55. OG's going to die. He's gonna be like, hey guys, so where's that OG 55 experience at?
Right over there, Soak City.
Well, it also makes me question too when because I've heard this go both ways from a lot of people that share the same faith as me, where it's like when we reach heaven, we don't see the individual as our loved one from down here, because
Right.
once we go through heaven, all of sin, all of that hate and hurtfulness and pain that we dealt with down here all goes away. So that's all non-existent up there. So it's like, so when you see that person, do you see them as the worldly person that you knew from when you lived on Earth, or you just see them as an individual, sort of like how when he said about the woman, like he didn't necessarily, they didn't have to talk, but he felt that connection.
Right.
So, and I get that both ways, because I've heard it from people that say that, but also I'm a strong believer in when they say you have a guardian angel, that you have your loved ones watching over you. If they don't see you as that anymore, then why are they watching over you in that manner?
Right.
And then
Well,
it's also the fact too that, as I said, I use the term like from the book and the movie Heaven is for Real. When the young boy met his grandfather or great grandfather, he was able to recognize as his grandfather. So I've seen people like bring up both ways,
Mhm.
but again, nobody ever knows until you actually experience it yourself.
Well, yeah, and what Eben Alexander was describing is that Earth is soul school, and he's mentioned it in other videos, other interviews, where this isn't the only time you're going to do the Earth experience. You know, over eons, you might come back. You know what I'm saying? You might come back. It might be a female. I might be a woman next time.
Hey,
You know?
I might be a woman, OG.
Yeah, I mean, hey, when you rode Star
Well,
Tours,
apparently Star Tours already thinks you're there.
yeah,
Right.
you're already a woman. You know, she's the rebel spy. Get her.
Right.
You know,
Oh my God.
oh man, that was funny. But like, so who knows all the relationships that you've kind of garnered over these multiple lifetimes. So when you go up to this afterlife or heaven, yeah, you might have, like, I might see my grandmother in this life, but there might be loved ones up there that I don't even know of.
Yeah,
That
well,
I had in other lifetimes that I will recognize when I get up there.
Or
Well,
even like, as you had mentioned, like with reincarnation, you know, it's like we're here now, but who's even really to say how many times we have really passed through here as
That's what
a
I'm
different
saying.
individual before actually being this, you know? But
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when you go up there, you're going to have loved ones and family from other lifetimes. And
Yeah.
obviously, like we said before, the brain is a restrictive valve. It has to restrict your knowledge of all that other stuff so you can learn the
Yeah.
lessons here. So you're not going to know any of that stuff until you get up there. Go ahead, Webba.
No, yeah, those are great points. And the thing is, like, you hear people talk about how they'll meet like someone that they never seen before, but they recognize the energy. And then they, through the communication, OG, like you were talking about, they're then, if then they know, oh, this is my great ancestor from like the year 15 whatever, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like this very old, like, they have that connection, because since, you know um as spiritual beings, you're eternal, right? So you live on for ever, right?
Right.
And through multiple iterations. So it's just all it's all really, really fascinating, and it's just insane, because when you have like these spots, I was telling you, OG, right, George, I was telling you, OG, where a lot of these experiences, it's kind of hard to tell too, because I would say kind of like that place you went to was kind of like a midpoint, so to speak. Like a lot of these experiences, people will go to like a section, and they'll have a choice. If they're given the choice to go back, to either go on or go back, and are not forced back, they either end up at like a place where there's like a kind of like a medium, where like there's like a river or like a gate or a fence or something that divides from where the person who is guiding them and from where they're at. And if they cross over that medium there, they cannot go back anymore.
Yeah.
So
And
it's like,
yeah, they tell them too, or God, you know, will say, or the spirit guide, whoever will say, hey, if you cross over that line, or
Yeah.
if you cross through that white picket fence or whatever it is,
yeah.
that's it. You can't come back. You know what I'm saying? You're done. You're
Yeah.
back. So
And it's very interesting too, because sometimes, right? I mean, obviously we have life-saving, medical procedures, right? And they do, help people come back to life, right? But at the same time, though, there's stories where, it's almost like if the spiritual essence determines if the body lives or dies. Because from some people's experiences, like, their body isn't working, right? They're in the near death experience, having this experience, and then they choose to want to live. And all of a sudden, when they get back into their body starts to just work like magically. When
Right.
it wasn't before, there was no way the doctors could get them alive. And if they chose to continue on, then their body would just cease to like live.
And that kind of goes into the topic of mind and matter a little bit too, Eva.
Yeah.
Like where like you don't even have to necessarily die and come back to have something like that happen. You ever notice somebody will live a normal life, right? They'll feel fine, but then they go to the doctor, let's say, and they get diagnosed with something terrible. Then after the diagnosis, they start to decline.
Yeah.
That's not a coincidence. It really is. Now that you know you have the disease, you are creating it. You're pushing it along. When you didn't know, you were fine. But once you got that diagnosis, you started to feel more sick. And you see this with all kinds of stuff, like anxiety disorder and stuff, where like literally like hypochondriacs can imagine things and actually manifest symptoms. I actually watched a young lady on YouTube. She's a coach for basically hypochondria and anxiety disorder. She says when she was going through it really bad, she would literally go to the doctor, right? And the doctor would tell her, like, for example, if she has like a UTI, okay, not to get too personal or whatever, let's just say a UTI. And the doctor says, just take your antibiotics. You have nothing to worry about. As long as you don't get serious back pain, you're fine. She would say that when the doctor would tell her, as long as you don't get X, Y, and Z, she gets it every single time. She said she would go home and start to get the one thing the doctor said, that be worried if you get this, and she would get that pain, and she would get it really, really bad.
Because thinking about it.
Just think about your brain can manifest. I don't know how that works. I don't know the science behind that, but you think it kind of becomes it. She said she would be in excruciating pain, but there'd be nothing there. But it was just all because the doctor told her, if you have pain there, it's a problem. So she freaked herself out, and then she started getting pain there, but there was nothing. There was no infection there, nothing happening there. That's crazy to me that your brain can physically create a symptom.
And that's why I don't listen to people.
Yeah, I know. And I'm a little bit of a hypochondriac where like, like that's why I don't watch medical shows. Like I'll watch a medical show like Good Doctor or something, and I'll have that fucking disease in episode 4 like by the next day, dude.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because there is an episode of House. I absolutely love that show with Hugh Laurie. There was an episode where he and Dr. Cuddy was on a plane. They were traveling somewhere, and there was this kind of epidemic that was going on throughout the plane, and each person was catching it something. But here, House actually diagnosed them, and I forget the actual logical term of it, the medical term, but nothing actually was going on. It was just because one person said they felt symptoms, it got into everybody's head. So they all were imagining when they said, oh, I have a rash. Oh, I have a rash too. I'm starting to break up. Well, here, nobody had nothing. It was just all subconscious.
I'm telling you.
This guy right here.
I'm telling you. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've had that happen to me before. Like I've had that where like I'll read something and I'm like, oh shit. Oh, my back hurts now. Oh, shit, I can definitely do that. But it goes to show you how the power of the mind. So think of it this way too. If you could create symptoms, right? Like the gal I told you I watch on YouTube, her name is Sherelle Thinks. She's great. But if she can think of a symptom or be told a symptom and get the symptom, that works in reverse too, you guys.
Yeah.
You can undo this stuff with your brain as well. I'm sure of it.
Right. Now, with the power of the mind, right, and like that kind of stuff. So to George's area with like some of the religion, right, there are near-death experiences where it's, some people who are religious do experience seeing Jesus or seeing, Muhammad or whatever, right? They're like all individual religious figure. But I remember reading one experience where the individual asked the person, "Oh, are you really so and so?" And the god or the being said that it's, I can be whatever that makes you the most comfortable. So obviously when we die here, we still kind of take our baggage, so to speak, probably with us. And since people have different cultures and upbringings and beliefs, that the afterlife might kind of be a little bit to what they probably
Customized.
customized to them, probably a little bit. Because remember, in that realm, there's no fit materialistic forms, right? So this godlike figure can be whatever you are comfortable with it being.
Well, that's a great point. That's a great point too, because when you're talking about heaven, well, that's kind of a subjective thing. What's heaven to me might not necessarily be heaven
Exactly.
to
Exactly. Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And then even with some experiences from people who are like atheists or agnostics, they'll a lot of times their like God will really just be like a entity that's just really a ball of light, a white light. That's it, a ball of white light. But they feel enveloped in warmth, love, peacefulness from this being, right? So this being has no figure to present to them. They just appear as like a neutral type of entity.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. And then I want to get on the topic too with the senses, right? So back to when he was talking about like the hearing and like the music stuff like that. So there was a case where Dr. Jeffrey Long was talking about a case that he knows well of Vicky. Vicky, because people always talk about, well, what happens to people who are blind, right? Let's get into blindness.
Okay, that's interesting.
Right? So, Vicky was born blind, right? And she was sing. She was a singer. Not like someone famous, but she was singing at these little pubs or whatever, I think. And so I remember one day she got into a car accident. Anyways, for the first time in her life, she saw herself on the operating table. And the reason why she knew that was her is because from the way she could see her hair and her ring, she knew it by touch, right? Because like you can kind of feel and know what something is like by the touch of it, right?
So she was on the operating table. She leaves her body,
and she's
and
looking
she's
down
looking
at it.
down, and now
Yes.
she's seeing herself for the first time because she's physically in their physical body. She's blind.
Blind from birth, yes. So she has no idea what sight is. She's seeing colors for the first time, and even a lot of times too, these people, George, they see colors that don't exist on Earth as well when they're in the afterlife area.
I've heard that there's colors
I
that do
heard that
not
too.
exist. I can't even imagine that.
Dude, that's wild. And on top of that, when Dr. Jeffrey Long was talking to her, he was like explaining to her that we see in a pie cone shape, and she laughed at it because she was like, that doesn't make sense to me, because her experience was the 360 spherical vision that I was talking about, where you see in all directions at the same time. That was her first experience with vision ever. So imagine that you don't have your first experience with vision like this in the physical world. Your first experience with vision is heightened visual senses with where you can see everywhere all around you.
So just to say, if she happened to come back and happened to develop eyesight, she'd probably look and say, "Oh, compared to my first experience, this sucks."
Yeah,
Well, yeah, she probably
much.
would. She probably would be disappointed because this is a very restrictive kind of way to see compared to something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then there was another case I read where a little girl, I believe she had like drowned like in this lake or something, but then she was lifted. But then she lifted out of the lake, right? And she was able to. I think that she was like she was like pretty much almost blind or whatever, but she was able to like from far distances, like across the lake, see details on telephone poles and the detail on birds feathers and stuff like that. And then she was able to just appear there on top of that height automatically.
What?
And dude, it is so wild, dude. I'm like, how does that even
Can I ask you both something?
No,
I actually
George.
I actually had a conversation with Slimer about this. And just to what your description of that, Ebba, is it's almost like having superpowers. So when you take something like when you have like a creation for like a film, such as like from Marvel or Star Wars or what have you, anything that's kind of like out of world kind of thing, where it's like, okay, in the mind, you create a superhero like Spider-Man or Iron Man or Superman, Captain Marvel, like all that kind of thing. Do you feel like that these people that actually created these, because when you kind of look at it through an out of realm experience, it's almost like looking at a superhero, So is that a coincidence for these people that actually create these characters? And you say, oh, it's something that just came into my head. Well, maybe not really. Could it possibly be from a personal experience that they experienced, or
they pull from this stuff. I know George Lucas pulls from a lot of spirituality for Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's even George Lucas even pulls, I think, a lot from like what people call the law of attraction. You know what I'm saying? You kind of attract what you think and what you believe, sort of like so. I absolutely believe it. And like you were talking about James Cameron with Avatar and stuff. They pull from, I'm sure, especially a guy like James Cameron, I'm sure he's pulled from near-death experiences and spirituality and stuff, and uses that as inspiration for his stories. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so too. And on top of that, also like, so you have like kind of spiritual stuff, but then also you have, like stuff that's alien, right? Like in our physical world, like aliens, right? If they're from like another planet, right? They probably have some superpowers or something, right? But yeah, I mean, like as a creative, you pull from different sources to create your new characters. But the good thing though is like that. You're right, George. It's almost like having superpowers. But it's good that we don't probably have that in this life, because then it would be so misused by the corruption of humans. Because a lot of times when you read about near-death experiences, like people who like say died on the table, on the operating table, sometimes if they're able to get to go down to the level of like the doctors or whatever, they'll try to actually communicate with the doctors or whoever, and they're like, I'm fine. And at the moment, they don't know why everybody's upset or in a panic. They're like, what's going on? And not until they realize that nobody can see them, nobody can hear them, and then they realize, oh crap, that's me on the table. Now, here's a fascinating thing too: is George? I don't know if you brought it up or OG earlier, but someone brought it up about and I guess kind of Eben Alexander did too with like the amnesia thing. But a lot of times when people have near death experience, they don't there a lot of times there's not a concern for their like body or what's happening. Like they'll like, let's say they get hit by a car or whatever, and then like their body's dead on the ground, and then they're there, and then they're like figuring out why everybody's panicking. They're like, oh, what's going on? Then they see like, oh, that's my body. But it's almost like they're disassociated from it. Like, oh, well, that's not me. That's like a shell of some person. Like that's not me, and they feel totally calm, and then they go move on to like to have their experience, right? And so it's just very fascinating too, because it's like, of course, every experience is going to be a little bit different depending on the individual, but a lot of times it's the same kind of structure, right? You die, you see the white light, you go through some type of tunnel or passageway to the other side. You're led by a being, and what I've heard is that even if you're the loneliest person on Earth, I've heard that you will never die and move on alone. There will always be some type of spiritual entity with you to guide you back home. And it's interesting because
unless you're my ex.
Yeah, probably not. But the interesting thing, George, is that a lot of people who have these experiences, they don't call Earth home. They call what they experience there, they call that home, not here. They're like,
exactly, and that's why the song from Carrie Underwood is her song's called Temporary Home. Like, this is our temporary home, and it's a country song. I know OG wouldn't be too big of a fan on country songs, but
if it's not Shabuzi,
but it's a very telling kind of song because it tells a story, and it's titled Temporary Home, where it's like everything that we're living here, we are only passing through for a short period of time. Even though someone can live into their 90s, they've been on Earth for 90 years, and it's like, for us, that's a long time. That's a lot. But compared to the afterlife, 90 years is very short, very limited.
Very. That's what I was saying earlier. With when it comes to like our earthly time and space compared to the eternity of the afterlife, it's a completely different measuring stick. And it's going to feel different.
Exactly. I mean, it's almost like when you think about how old our universe is, right? 90 years. even 1,000 years is nothing to the lifetime of the universe. So think
It's a
about
speck.
so think about beings who can live forever, right?
Right.
That's nothing. And not only that, but you're not. But that reality isn't even in this reality. It's like George. There's some other videos where Dr. Eben Alexander says, because he kind of mentioned it, but he didn't go into though. He was literally he literally left the multiverse. and he went into what he called the core, was he called the place where it was ultimate like blackness, but he said like it was empty but filled, but filling at the same time, and he felt just peace and love in that core, and he called God because that's the kind of thing he heard in that core realm was in there. So it was nothing, but it was everything.
Yeah, he does say that. He gets into, there's a lot. Everyone at home, do yourself a favor if this fascinates you. Go to YouTube and search Eben, and that's with a B, like baby, not like a V. So it's Eben, Eban, Alexander, because he does hour-long interviews and seminars and like he gets into this stuff. But he talks about that core being interesting. It was a inky blackness, but at the same time, it was filled with light.
Yeah,
just the weird.
Now,
I can't even imagine this.
Now I have heard. Now I actually have heard stories of the opposite way. Now there was someone who was living their life, very rigid, very cruel, very dark, and they had a near-death experience, and it was an out-of-body experience where they ended up seeing what to them was hell. But at the same time, they still had the presence of God with them. But it was almost like God was showing them, if you don't change your ways and you get worse, this is what your eternal could look like. Now, for me, with my belief, I'm always one that, again, it kind of goes back to what Ebba was saying. I feel like that one's own afterlife is kind of customized to them. So for me, and as I said, I grew up Christian, I was raised Christian, but I have a hard time with a lot of people in the Christian community that is very judgmental to say, oh, well, you live this sort of way, you're going to hell. You live this way, you're going to. That is not your call. That is up between the individual and God, in my belief. That is for God to decipher of like what their afterlife is to become. Now, when this guy came back to life, what his description was, a lot of people, when they say hell, they think of like burning and it's all
fire and brimstone.
Yeah, what this guy described was it was very dark, it was very cold. He saw like a long pathway, almost like a very dark alleyway, and everything of his fears and insecurities and everything that made him the way he was on earth, that's what was surrounding him.
So that's interesting. And this is interesting. I'm glad you touched upon this, George. Now, Eben Alexander actually talks about this, doesn't he? With that life review, Ebba, right? When he gets into this, he gets into the life review. Yeah. And this is interesting to me because one of the things that I've always struggled with, because I went to Catholic high school. Okay, I went to Catholic high school. I went to a Christian junior high. I went to a Christian elementary. So I grew up learning a lot about the Bible, things like that. But one of the things that I've always struggled with was we get taught that God is this ever-forgiving entity, right? You basically, like, he's ever-forgiving, okay?
And he's full of love.
And he's full of love, unconditional, full of love, right? But then we turn the corner, and then at the same time, religion will tell you, well, but if you fuck up, you're going to go to hell forever, right?
Damnation.
So for me, those two ideas don't work together. Like,
and for people that are trying, and for the people that are trying to spread the word of God, you're not spreading the word of God correctly because you're turning people away from God. By doing that, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to tell you what God is doing, so I'm going to be judgmental upon you, where sometimes you have to actually, in the words of Michael Jackson, start with the man in the mirror. Look at yourself in the reflection
Right.
before passing judgments on somebody else.
Yes, and that's the thing I have an issue with, is because if God is all forgiving, and He knows that we're just mere mortals, to banish someone to hell for an eternity, for a mistake on a physical in a physical realm, that you are a flawed human being, I feel is a little harsh. You know what I'm saying? I feel like, is he forgiving or is he not? So if he's for all forgiving, then the hell shouldn't exist technically. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
That's that. I've always had that kind of like, I don't really know.
I used to, sorry, really quick, Eben. I used to watch, one of my favorite all-time stand-up comedians was George Carlin.
Yeah.
I absolutely love his stand-up. And now, he was atheist. He didn't believe in God. Now, again, that's not for me to judge or what have you, but I thought it was kind of funny. He put it in a comedic way, but when you stop and think about it, how he says it, it's very telling. He was talking about religion and the belief of God. And he said, you have these people that say, God is very loving. No, I'm sorry. No, I got that backwards. He said that God will smite you and send you to hell for all eternal damnation because you are the sinner, and you're sinning of the flesh, and He cannot take that. So may the wrath of God smite you for all eternity. And then he pauses and he goes, but He loves you.
and that's what I'm talking about, George. And that's why I'm not saying this to doubt that there's God. There's 100. I think there's 100%.
But that's what makes people doubt God.
That's what makes people doubt God. And I think there's a lot of misinterpretations that have gone through the years from man that have perpetuated. And then you sprinkle in the corruption of the church and things like that. And then you have this man-made sort of concoction. Here's what I think. And I think Eben Alexander talks about it. And I think this is kind of where I kind of see where you are held accountable for your actions, but you're not damned for eternity, right? Off of mistakes. Right. This is what Eben Alexander says. You have a life review. You die, you have that life review. He talks about it. And in that life review, you experience your entire life, but you experience your entire life from the feelings and the perspective of all the people you interact with.
Yes, a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were doling out a lot of crap to people, you're on Twitter talking shit, being a hater, you're being a dick, you're beating people up, you're doing horrible stuff to people, right? You're going to feel that in your life review. You're going to feel but you're going to feel it from the other person's point of view.
And more too.
And more. He says you feel it even more because in that spiritual realm, you're more connected emotionally. So it hurts even more. So, terrible people in history, when they die, they experience all that hurt from those people's perspectives. And that's the hell, so to speak. But it's not a permanent thing. It's during that life review, but it's a lesson. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Remind me when my ex goes through hers to have my iPhone ready.
Well, right. So two things. So with a life review, OG, you're totally right. A lot of the experience is these people will experience all their life or important parts of their life, and they experience it from their point of view, but also from the other party's point of view, right? And
Correct.
It's more intense because the lesson is taught. Even though to you this incident may have seemed small or no big deal, this was a big deal to the other person.
Exactly. And so you kind of so there. I like that because it does provide justice. Like these people aren't getting away with it. There's definitely justice being served. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. At the same time, though, you're not condemning someone to an eternity for a lifetime that's an insignificant. Like we talked about, our lives are insignificant in the overall timeline of everything. So how do you condemn someone for an eternity over 85 years?
Well, and that too, and also a lot of times when they're having their life review, there's another entity, whether it's family or some other spiritual being, with them for that life review, and they say like that there is never any. there's never any judgment. Not like when you hear religion. I'm not trying to bash religion, but when you hear like that, you're being judged, right? In these life reviews, you are judging yourself because
Yes.
you are re-experiencing everything that's happening to you and to the other person. So you're judging yourself.
Right.
The entity is not judging you. God's not judging you. You're judging yourself based on what happened in your life, and that's not to really like punish you. Be like, oh, like fuck you, George. It's like no. You have to
I
see.
appreciate you used me in that example.
Of course, bro. I love you, man. but it's to show you how your actions affect other people. Now, on the hell stuff, there are like hellish accounts, but I think it's only like 1 or 2% of all NDEs.
Right, yeah. Like a lot of times when people say, "Oh, you do this, you're going to hell." You know how many people would be in hell? We'd all be in hell.
Right.
If that was the case. But I do believe now. Again, I'm not saying this in a judgmental way because I'd be sounding like a hypocrite. But in my personal belief, now as I said, I don't know because that was between them and God. But I do believe that there are certain beings that were here on Earth that I feel that have a more possible eternal, how do I put it, kind of suffering upon themselves. And one thing that I firmly believe in, that when you take another life that it was not meant for them to take, and especially if it was multiple, again, I don't know what it is for God or what have you, but I'm just giving my personal thing on it. I feel that I don't personally feel like that they just go through a blip of a moment or feeling it and then they get to be amongst the rest. I feel like that they would have their own category. For instance, like as I said, there's certain people, I don't know if I should actually mention them, but
like 1930s. Yeah, I know.
1930s.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So, but again, I'm not putting full judgment. It just makes me question how much of a tolerance does God have on those particular things.
Well, here's the thing though, because what Eben Alexander is saying is what you dole out, you get 10 times up there. So they are at a different level because he doled out a whole lot, right? Yeah. So he doled out a whole lot, so he's going to feel it more than the average person would. So he is suffering more.
And then that's true too, because time down here is not what it is up there. So it's much of a longer process, even though you don't feel the time. But
it could still be,
Well, that's true to that point also. But with the health thing though, from the experiences I've read, right, the few hellish stuff that I've heard, that I think there is still a possibility of a hell-like place. Now they've been described as, George, like you said, very dark. There is a very foul, like the worst, stinkiest, like disgusting smell of smell you can ever smell in your life, like death and decay, pretty much. There's a lot of loud kind of screams, which sounds like hell, and then
basically it's almost like pain and suffering, but like everything surrounding you.
Exactly, and it's dark. It's dark, and then also these people see like the worst, grotesque, demonic faces that they have never that they cannot imagine in like real life. Now, to say that though, these people they still have a positive outcome from this experience because they've learned to change their behavior of what they were doing bad in the world.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's been even some cases where the person called out to God, George, and God, because they realized they were in the wrong, and God came and saved them. So, so even though this place of hell probably does exist, or what we want to call it, I don't think it's a forever thing, OG. We're like, oh, you are here for fucking ever. Like, if you are someone who is not learning your lesson, probably, then yeah, you're down there. But I think once you realize to yourself that God is always there for you and God still loves you, and you realize your mistakes, then I think you could still be saved and be brought up.
And that goes back to like the teachings, like of how many lessons there are.
Right.
And it's like, do you want to accept those lessons?
Right. Now, one last thing I want to touch upon before we go tonight is deja vu.
Oh, you know what? Hold on a sec. Deja vu. Real quick, OJ, I want to talk about terminal lucidity. Do you guys know what that is? Have you heard
I do
that, OJ?
not, but we could talk about it. I don't know what it is, but
Do
we
they
can
have
talk
a
about
topical cream for it?
it.
George, I'll look for you on Amazon.
Okay,
So
so go ahead, brother.
yeah, so terminal lucidity is a point where someone is like on their deathbed. They have like they're barely there, pretty much, right? Like in their own state of mind, right? They can't really talk to relatives. There's this kind of like they're dying, pretty much, right? And like they can't remember things, and just that really bad state. Terminal lucidity is pretty much when, out of really nowhere, maybe a few hours to a day or two before they die, they remember everything. They can function like a normal being and talk to their family and staff, and they have the cognitive function back, whereas they have lost it before. And then a few hours or days after they die.
That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
We had a conversation, didn't we, about Betty White?
Yes, we did.
And what was her last word?
Her last word literally was she called out her husband's name, Alan. After
Alan.
she said Alan, that was it.
So it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that her last word was Alan, and that's all she said was Alan. I think Betty White, I think she saw Alan right before she passed. I think that there's the fabric kind of tears between our earthly world and the spiritual world when you're crossing over like that. And it was separating. There was a transition there, and she saw her late husband. And that's why she said his name. But what say you, Ebba?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Like when you're at that point of dying, and here's the thing, too, like when people are dying, they can feel it. They know that they're dying, right? And a lot of times, like in the case like this, they'll see, like, maybe it's for like a few days that's happening, right? But they'll see like family members who have been dead for a long time, or like their husband or wife or whoever, right? And then, or like family members will say that they're the person who's in the deathbed, it has been talking to someone in the corner or something, or next to their bed, right? And it's like that now. Now it's like their consciousness almost is now pretty much detaching itself from from the material body. Even though they're still in there, they're detaching themselves, and they're like now pretty much ready to go. When their like time is up, basically. And that's the thing too, is like that. Whenever people die, I always wonder, like, was their transition easy? Because there's been even cases where you can have a death experience, like what I was talking about earlier, where there's different cases where you can have one where it's like out of fear, right? If you have an immense amount of fear, yeah, you could pass out, but sometimes people have your death experiences. Or there was a case I was reading. A guy was what's it called, like paragliding or whatever, when you're like over the water. What's that called?
Parasailing.
Yeah, I think it was parasailing. And then something happened where, like, I forgot, but he started falling, right? Like something broke or whatever. He started falling towards the wall, like falling down, and he was super high up. But then all of a sudden he saw just a body falling down, like a body falling down. He was in the air, but he realized that was his body falling down. So he pretty much left his body and just watched his body fall towards the water.
That's crazy.
I have heard that, like, an out of body experience, like when, like, they say your life flashes before your eyes.
Yeah,
It's like that's literally what happens. But also to what OG was saying, because that also happened with my grandmother when she was passing. She unfortunately she passed on Christmas Day 2011, and the last words that she said before she left was, she called out her dad. She said, "Dad." She looked down the hallway and she said, "Dad." She lifted her head up, said, "Dad," and then she slumped backwards. So I definitely believe in, like, when it is your time, you have one specific person that was in your life that maybe you were very close with, or that has like a special connective bond, that they're the ones that come to take you home.
right.
But I do hope that, I always say, and I always tell God this, that it's like, when it is my time, I don't want to go out suffering. It's like, I don't want to have like a suffocating feeling, like I can't breathe. It's like, just like, take me peacefully in my sleep.
Well, George, to your point. Sorry, John, I'm going on a long thing here.
No, you're fine.
But to your point, while there is like a lot of suffering that can happen, at least kind of in a good thing, I guess you could say, is that there's been a lot of stories where, let's say someone drowns, right? They feel the rush of the water, they feel all that intensity, but then it's gone. And they're still aware of what's happening. They're still consciously awake of what's happening.
Right.
But it's like all that pain and suffering, it's now gone. Now they
True.
can be peaceful.
It's just for me, I wouldn't want to feel that last moment of.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, getting stabbed to death or being burned alive or whatever, right? That shit would
Yeah.
suck. But
Yeah.
but OG, real
As I
quick,
said, really quick, and as I said, that's just my prayer request to God. And God forbid, knock on wood, if that happens when I get up there, I'm giving him hell.
Yeah. There you go.
OG, real quick, before your deja vu stuff, can I show you guys in the audience my books?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here is one that I have.
Oh, you're really into it. Okay, interesting. Cautious Beyond Life. Awesome, dude. Who's that from? Who's that by? Pim
Vaughn.
Van Lamel. Okay, cool.
And then
Interesting.
also
Life After Life. Okay, I've heard that. Raymond Moody. Okay, I've heard of this one. Okay.
Yep. And then also, here's the thing, like, as much as I am into the afterlife and near-death experience stuff, I'm really also interested in the realm of just consciousness itself, right? Consciousness, different realities, stuff like that. So, I have this.
Psychedelic Explorer guy. See, dude, Eben, you're into this stuff, bro.
And then got this.
Dream yoga. Love it, love it. Dang, dude.
And then, hold on, yeah, not done yet.
DMT, Spirit. Wow.
Hold on, and then,
The Tibetan yoga is dream and sleep. Awesome, awesome.
and then this book right here, what I'm about to bring up, was written by Michael Raduga. He is a guy from Russia. And this here, I like this because it brings the practicality of the lucid dreaming experience. But anyways, then there's this book from Dr. Stephen LaBerge.
Exploring the world. Okay, cool.
And like these two here are my go-to for actual practice.
Nice. Oh, that's a big boy.
Oh,
Lucid dreaming. That's a big boy.
yeah.
That's science right there, Eva. That's science right there.
Yeah,
love
you
it.
have just as many books of that as I did with Playboys.
There you go.
No, I will say I did have 3 more books on NDEs, but an event with a former friend of mine a long time ago never gave them back to me. So there's that. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit before we close it out. Let's talk a little bit about deja vu. So deja vu, for those of you that are not familiar with what that is the feeling when you do something. Let's say you go to the supermarket and you are reaching for a bag of rice, right? You get this sense of like, I've done this before, right? Like it feels very, very familiar.
Yeah.
Ebba, I'll start with you, man. What's deja vu? Is there something spiritual to this? Is there something more to this than meets the eye?
See, I think there could be. Well, I mean, it's hard, right? Because deja vu, I've definitely had it multiple times before. I mean, everybody has, right? You always experience it. You're like, I've done this before. But this is where I come back to more, is this a practical, physical level type of brain activity going on? Or is there really a more mystical, spiritual thing happening here? Or could it be both combined, right? Because also, there is such a thing called false memories as well.
Well, there is, yes.
A
lot of people with OCD actually have false memories. They think that maybe, yes, OCD people sometimes will get paranoid, like they remember things that they did that they didn't really do, and they worry about like consequences. Like, oh, 5 years ago when I hit that pothole with me, it was a deer. It was they remember things falsely. It's an OCD thing for sure. But go ahead, brother. I do apologize.
Oh wow, I did not know that. That's really interesting. But yeah, so I think it could be maybe attributed to that. It could be attributed to maybe, there's a parallel you that has done this and you're connected some spiritual way and you do it here now as well. I've heard that deja vu is something that's good because it means you were meant to do that specific thing. And like, because if you did that, that means you're on the right course in life. That's what I've heard, which to me, it sounds really cool.
Right.
But I mean, it is a very interesting phenomenon that happens. But yeah, I'm not sure what or why it happens. Really, it's very cool though.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, my thoughts on it are kind of similar to yours. I don't know if it's spiritual. I don't know if it's physical. Maybe it's a little bit of both. It might have something to do with like the filtrate, like we talked about with Eben Alexander. The brain is a filtering device, sort of maybe malfunctioning as a filtering device for like a second.
Yeah.
So maybe in like a past life, maybe you were doing that thing, and you're sort of like for like a second, you like kind of remember it. You know what I'm saying? And then you zap back to like, you know,
Right.
reality sort of. So like they could be real memories, real instances of like former lives where you were doing something very similar. It's a possibility.
Now
See-
my deja vus actually are kind of different, where I actually remember doing them, but in this lifetime as me. But when it happens, I'm like, huh, I actually remember doing this exactly in the same pattern, in the
Right.
same instance. And I feel like that could be kind of like, as you both were mentioning, like a little bit of both, like sort of like a hybrid. But I think it's might be where you get that little bit of, like when I mentioned earlier that we only use 10% of our brain, it almost makes me feel like that deja vu is like a little bit of an 11%. So it's like an extra 1% that just briefly cracks through to the 10%, just briefly enough where it's like, hey, it's like I've seen this image before. I don't know where, but I remember doing it.
Yeah, see, it's weird because for me, deja vu, right? It's not just saying, and it's not to you, George, but it's like deja vu, like to me, isn't just saying, "Oh, I did that before," because I've done the same thing plenty of times. It's doing something specifically in a,
Yeah,
in a
no,
specific
yeah,
way.
correct. This is like
Yeah.
something like, I'm trying to think of how to put it in description. Like even like your surroundings. Like
Right.
so when you're doing that certain action, it's like you remember this being over here and this being there, and it's like
Right.
you're in the same place setting.
Well,
It's like everything.
that and also to George, I would say it's also not even remembering like the event, but it's also to remembering how it felt as well. Because I'd be like, I feel this has happened before. I feel like I've done this exact same thing.
Right.
Because
It's got to be some sort of brain glitch or something
in the
right?
Matrix, right?
Yeah.
But also too, now where it may be a little bit different for me is because OG tapped upon this like way earlier in the recording. Like when we, kind of like forget things like as we get older
Yeah.
and what have you. Now with me, I was actually diagnosed with a photogenic memory.
I wish I was, man. That's so
I
fucking
can
awesome.
remember literally things in very nitty-gritty detail, from time, date, place, year, in very detail. Like I can tell you a specific date, where I was, what I was doing, what I was wearing. And so for me, I think since I do have that kind of extra neurologic cognitive skill, I guess you could call it, very small percentage of people have it. Actress Mary Lou Henner also has it. That I think that's where deja vu for me is. I can then remember specifically, like literally feel like doing it because I have that photogenic memory.
That makes sense. You're a unique case, Georgie.
I am.
Yeah, it is interesting though, this deja vu thing, and it's fascinating to me because, yeah, I don't know if it's physical or spiritual. I'm really kind of like I'm torn on it, But you guys make a good
I'm leaning more towards it's more
physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you guys make a great point where when you have deja vu, you feel like this specific exact circumstance, right? Not like this is kind of familiar. This is actually like I'm at Vaughn's reaching for the bag of rice, and now I'm at Vaughn's again reaching for the bag of rice, right? So that sort of doesn't really play to my like other life kind of theory, because you wouldn't have that same experience from another life.
Or even I'll give you an even more in-depth example. Like if you're walking in the park,
right,
and you pass two people having a conversation to the left of you sitting on a bench, and the one person said a specific phrase to that other person, and you're like, wow, I remember experiencing that moment where I'm walking in the park, two people are sitting on a bench,
Right.
and they're exchanging these words, and they said the exact same phrase.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there has to be something there, like whether it's physical or spiritual, or probably a little bit both, maybe a bit more physical. There has to be something going on where our brain is maybe glitching out a little bit for a second, because you could say the exact same scenario, George, at Disneyland, right? I mean, we all been to Disneyland how many times, right?
Yeah.
Here's I go there and I don't experience that every single time I go, right? But then there could
Right.
be one thing where I'm with you or OG and we're doing something. I'm like, I feel like I've done this before. Like it's like something
Yeah.
very like specific. Like I grab food off the counter in one of the restaurants, right? I'm like, I feel like I've already done this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though I've eaten there plenty of times, so
It's weird.
strange.
It's weird. It's an interesting phenomenon. You know, I haven't really looked into deja vu as much as I have like this afterlife stuff. So, but I'm kind of curious as to what deja vu is, because it might be tied to stuff, the brain and everything, and spirituality, like we were discussing today.
Well, that seems. I think that consciousness itself, because I said I love near-death experiences, which I do think, by the way, that might be a little misleading term, because in most cases that I've read, the person's actually just fucking dead. Like,
They're dead. It's not near death.
no, it is not near death. And the one lady I was talking to Yoji about, she was a orthopedic spine surgeon. I forgot her name, but you can find her on YouTube. She had a near death experience kayaking, and she got stuck under the water. Something happened with the kayak, and she got stuck under the water for 30 minutes. Okay, half an hour she's underwater for. She had a near death experience, and her definition of death, because she was on a panel with Dr. Samparnia and this other neuroscience guy. She said that her definition of death is not when the brain stops, not when the heart stops, but when your soul or consciousness leaves the body. That's her definition of death.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That makes total sense. That would be, yeah, that's death. Yeah, exactly. Because you can technically keep someone alive through machines
Yeah,
and keep them breathing, but they're not, you know.
Which,
right.
again, with me, I've told many people, family members, loved ones, if I have to be living off of a machine and tubes and I'm a vegetable, please let me go. I do not want to live like that.
Yeah. No, exactly. Exactly. Fascinating conversation today, fellas. Fascinating conversation. I didn't know you were such a connoisseur, Ebba. We might have to do another one of these, you know?
Oh, I'm down. I love this stuff, man, because it's so interesting to me that there's a different reality, and where like there is these, it's just different, and we move on to another place where we have heightened experience. We can still be with loved ones, pets, you name it. Some place that is you know some place that doesn't have death and decay, and it's just it's amazing. And then not only that, but the other aspects of consciousness is like what happens to you during psychedelics, during dreams, during lucid dreams, right? So all
It's
that
called
stuff.
it's called growing up in the 70s.
Yes, but like for example, like when you take DMT or like ayahuasca, right? Because you hear a lot about like these spiritual journeys these people go on as well. So it's
Right.
like, holy shit, dude! It's like it's so fascinating to me that we are these spiritual beings, pretty much kind of trapped in these physical vessels. I
Yeah.
think was it Eben Alexander who said that? I think it was him. He said like that pretty much. This is a costume. Like we're
Yeah,
just
no,
here, like,
exactly.
yeah, right. We're in a play. This is the costume. Then once we're done, we just take it off.
Yeah, I've even heard experiences of people who have died and come back, who have said that when they get like they explain it as being crammed back in your body.
Yes,
It's
yes.
an uncomfortable feeling of being so restricted in this
That
physical.
and then when they come back, they've also said like that they feel heavy. They feel the weight of the body as well.
Yes, I've heard that. So it's fascinating.
It's like, what?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of subtopics about this that we can bring up again. We'll do another video on this. I mean,
Okay.
I think it'd be fun. I love this kind of stuff.
Me
George
too.
the Italiano, you're battling a cold, man.
I am. Like, this is like, especially at night, it always hits me at night. Like, it's like at a certain time, like my nose and like the cough is just, ugh.
Yeah, well, we thought it was allergies at first, but it's not. It's
No.
too much now.
No, it's an actual cold. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
George, sounds like you could use some Uber Eats, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really probably could right about now.
Yeah. Yep. But George, if you let everybody home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on Instagram under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you can find me right here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
There he is. And Mr. Webba, where can they find you on social media?
Yes, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram and kind of Twitter, but I'm on both of those platforms, Mr. Webba at Webslinger760. And then you can also find me probably web slinging through your city.
Yeah. Mr. Web Slinger. Everybody at home, fascinating conversation. We dove deep today, really deep into the multiverse. The multiverse, the actual multiverse, you know? So if you have, I'm sure you guys have thoughts on this. So make sure you comment down below. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Any theories, concepts, whatever you want to talk about, put in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching.
Really quick. Sorry. I just have to say, and with some of the context of what we were talking about, like with, faith and religion and beliefs, all that we ask is just keep it civil, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Keep it civil in the comments. And until the next time, keep it easy peasy. I don't know. I don't even know why I said that, but I just wanted to use that drop right now.
Yeah, that was good.